Margaret Whitmore had everything money could buy: a $50 million penthouse overlooking Central Park, designer clothes worth more than most people's homes, and a husband whose tech empire made headlines daily. But on this particular Tuesday morning, as she screamed at a 17-year-old girl to clean faster, she had no idea that the next 60 seconds would cost her family everything. The maid's daughter, covered in expensive wine and holding a broken crystal glass, was about to deliver a response that would shatter more than just glassware. It would destroy the biggest business deal in Whitmore Industries history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started like any other in the Whitmore penthouse. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden rays across marble floors that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a year. Margaret Whitmore stood in her walk-in closet, surrounded by designer gowns and shoes that filled 3 separate rooms, preparing for what she considered the most important day of her social calendar. Today was the day she would host Elena Vasquez, the wife of tech mogul Ricardo Vasquez, whose company was on the verge of signing a $50 million partnership deal with her husband's firm. The contract had been months in the making, and Charles Whitmore had made it crystal clear that impressing the Vasquez family wasn't just important, it was everything. "This deal will triple our market share in Latin America," Charles had explained over breakfast just 3 days prior. "Ricardo values family above all else. If Elena likes you, if she feels comfortable in our home, this contract is as good as signed." Margaret had spent weeks planning every detail of the luncheon. She'd hired the city's most exclusive caterer, arranged for rare orchids to be flown in from Thailand, and even had the penthouse's already spotless interior deep-cleaned by a team of professionals. Nothing could go wrong. Carmen Rodriguez had been cleaning homes in Manhattan for 15 years, but she'd never worked in a place quite like the Whitmore penthouse. Every surface seemed to gleam with an otherworldly perfection, and every piece of furniture looked like it belonged in a museum. She moved carefully through the rooms, her practiced hands ensuring that not a single fingerprint or speck of dust remained. Carmen had brought her daughter Sophia with her today, not by choice, but by necessity. The 17-year-old school had closed early due to a water main break, and Carmen's usual babysitter had cancelled at the last minute. Sophia was a good kid, responsible and quiet, currently working on homework at the kitchen island while her mother put the finishing touches on the dining room. "Mia, remember what I told you," Carmen whispered to her daughter as she polished the enormous dining table. "Stay quiet, stay out of the way, and don't touch anything unless I tell you to." Sophia nodded, looking up from her calculus textbook. At 17, she was already showing signs of the intelligence that would soon earn her a full scholarship to Columbia University, though neither she nor her mother knew it yet. She understood the importance of this job to her family. The money from cleaning houses like this helped pay for her school supplies, her mother's English classes, and the small apartment they shared in Queens. The morning progressed smoothly until Margaret decided to inspect Carmen's work personally. This wasn't unusual. Margaret prided herself on having standards that most people couldn't even comprehend. She walked through each room with the intensity of a military inspector, checking for imperfections that existed only in her imagination. "The bathroom mirrors need another pass," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been told no. "And make sure you get behind the toilets. I don't care that they're already clean. I want them perfect." Carmen nodded politely and returned to her work, though she had already cleaned each bathroom twice. She understood the psychology of wealthy clients. The need to assert control often had little to do with actual cleanliness and everything to do with power. As the afternoon approached, Margaret's anxiety began to spike. She checked her phone obsessively, rearranged the flowers for the 4th time, and found herself increasingly focused on every tiny detail. When she noticed Sophia sitting at the kitchen island, something inside her snapped. "What is that child doing here?" Margaret demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I specifically told you no children. This is a professional environment." "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm so sorry," Carmen began, her voice apologetic but steady. "Her school closed early and—" "I don't want excuses," Margaret interrupted. "I want solutions. The Vasquez family will be here in 2 hours, and I will not have some teenager disrupting my luncheon." Sophia looked up from her homework, feeling the tension in the room but unsure of what she had done wrong. She had been sitting quietly for over 3 hours, hadn't touched anything except her textbooks, and had even helped her mother by staying completely out of the way. "She's not disrupting anything," Carmen said quietly. "She's just doing homework." Margaret's eyes narrowed. In her world, questioning her judgment was tantamount to rebellion. The stress of the impending luncheon, combined with her natural need to control every aspect of her environment, created a perfect storm of entitlement and rage. "Don't tell me what is or isn't disruptive in my own home," she hissed. "If you can't handle simple instructions, maybe you're not the right person for this job." The threat hung in the air like a blade. Carmen needed this job, not just today's payment, but the steady work that Margaret provided twice a week. Losing this client would mean struggling to pay rent, cutting back on groceries, and possibly having to pull Sophia out of her advanced placement classes. As Margaret stalked around the kitchen, her designer heels clicking against the imported Italian tile, she began to notice other perceived imperfections. The crystal wine glasses in the cabinet weren't arranged to her satisfaction. The flowers in the living room were slightly wilted. The cushions on the sofa weren't perfectly fluffed. "And another thing," she continued, her voice rising with each complaint. "These glasses are spotted. How am I supposed to serve premium wine in spotted glasses?" Carmen examined the glasses, which were actually spotless, but she knew better than to argue. She reached for the cabinet to retrieve them for another polishing. But Margaret was already pulling them out herself, handling them with the aggressive carelessness of someone making a point. "Look at this," Margaret said, holding up a crystal glass that probably cost more than Sophia's monthly school expenses. "This is exactly the kind of sloppy work that makes me question whether you understand the standards required in a home like this." Sophia watched the scene unfold with growing discomfort. She had seen her mother endure difficult clients before, but never with this level of hostility. Carmen's face remained composed, but Sophia could see the slight tremor in her hands, a sign that her mother was fighting to maintain her professional composure. The doorbell rang, sending a jolt of panic through Margaret's system. She checked her watch frantically. The Vasquez family was 30 minutes early. "They're here!" she shrieked, her carefully maintained facade of sophistication crumbling instantly. "Everything needs to be perfect right now." In her panic, Margaret began moving frantically around the kitchen, adjusting things that didn't need adjusting, her movements becoming increasingly erratic. Carmen tried to help, but Margaret's micromanaging made every task take twice as long. "The wine," Margaret suddenly remembered. "I need to open the wine and let it breathe." She rushed to the wine refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of vintage Bordeaux that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her hands were shaking as she struggled with the corkscrew, her usual grace replaced by jittery desperation. The bottle slipped. Everything seemed to happen in slow motion. The dark red wine splashed across the pristine white marble, staining everything in its path. Drops landed on Carmen's uniform, on Sophia's textbook, and on Margaret's designer dress. The sound of crystal shattering against marble echoed through the penthouse as the wine glass Margaret had been holding fell from her other hand. For a moment, the kitchen was completely silent, except for the sound of wine dripping onto the floor. Then Margaret exploded. "Clean this up!" she screamed, her voice reaching a pitch that would have been impressive if it weren't so terrifying. "Clean it up right now!" Sophia jumped up instinctively to help her mother, grabbing paper towels from the counter. But as she bent down to wipe up the wine, Margaret's fury found a new target. "Not you!" she shrieked. "I don't want you touching anything else in this house." She turned to Carmen, her face red with rage and panic. "This is what happens when you bring distractions to work. Look what you've caused." Carmen began cleaning up the mess, moving as quickly as possible, while Margaret continued her tirade. The doorbell rang again. Longer this time, more insistent. "They're waiting!" Margaret screamed. "How am I supposed to explain this disaster? How am I supposed to serve them when everything is ruined?" She whirled around to face Sophia, who was still standing there with paper towels in her hand, wine stains on her school clothes, and a look of complete bewilderment on her face. "This is all your fault," Margaret snarled. "If you weren't here, none of this would have happened. Your mother would be focused on her job instead of worrying about babysitting." Sophia felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had been raised to respect adults, to apologize even when she wasn't wrong, to make herself small in situations like this. But as she looked at her mother, this woman who worked 16-hour days to provide for them, who had never once complained about cleaning up after people who treated her like she was invisible, something shifted inside her. "Clean faster!" Margaret screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "The Vasquez family is at my door, and everything is ruined because you people can't follow simple instructions." The words hit Sophia like a physical blow. You people. As if they were less human because they cleaned houses for a living. As if her mother's 15 years of perfect service meant nothing. As if the fact that Sophia was on track to graduate as valedictorian was irrelevant because she happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sophia Rodriguez looked at this woman, this person who had everything money could buy, but apparently couldn't buy basic human decency, and made a decision. That would change everything. She opened her mouth to speak. Sophia's voice cut through Margaret's hysteria like a knife through silk. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said, her tone calm, but carrying an edge that made everyone in the room freeze. "I think you should answer your door." Margaret spun around, her face contorted with disbelief. "Excuse me? Did you just— Your guests have been waiting outside for almost 5 minutes, Sophia continued, stepping carefully around the wine puddle. "And while you've been screaming about a simple spill, you've missed the opportunity to greet the most important visitors of your husband's career with the dignity they deserve." The doorbell rang a third time, this time accompanied by gentle knocking. Carmen's eyes went wide with terror. In 15 years of domestic work, she had never seen anyone speak to a client this way. She opened her mouth to apologize, to somehow undo whatever damage her daughter was about to cause, but Sophia held up a subtle hand. "You want to know what's really causing this disaster?" Sophia asked, her voice gaining strength. "It's not my presence here. It's not my mother's work. It's your complete inability to handle pressure with any semblance of grace." Margaret's mouth opened and closed, like a fish gasping for air. Nobody had ever spoken to her this way. Not her husband, not her friends. Certainly not someone she considered hired help. "How dare you?" Margaret began. But Sophia wasn't finished. "I've been sitting in your kitchen for 3 hours, Sophia said, moving to the sink and wetting a clean towel. "I've watched you rearrange those flowers 4 times, check your phone every 30 seconds, and criticize work that was already perfect. You're not upset about wine on the floor. You're terrified that you're not good enough for the people at your door." As if to punctuate Sophia's words, a woman's voice called through the door. "Hello, Mrs. Whitmore? This is Elena Vasquez." Margaret's face went pale. Elena Vasquez, the woman whose opinion could make or break a $50 million deal, was standing outside while Margaret stood in her kitchen, wine-stained and disheveled, being lectured by a teenager. "What you should be doing right now," Sophia continued, efficiently wiping up the wine with smooth, practiced motions, "is taking 30 seconds to breathe, putting on a smile, and remembering that hospitality isn't about perfect surroundings. It's about making people feel welcome." Sophia straightened up, the wine completely cleaned from the floor, and looked directly into Margaret's eyes. "Your guests don't care if a glass broke. They care about whether you treat them with respect and warmth, something you clearly know nothing about. Carmen watched in stunned silence as her 17-year-old daughter managed the crisis with more poise than a woman 3 times her age. Sophia moved to the cabinet, selected 2 new wine glasses, and placed them on the counter. "The Bordeaux is ruined," Sophia said matter-of-factly, "but you have a 2015 Chateau Margaux in the wine fridge that will pair better with your menu anyway. Open it now. Let Mrs. Vasquez help you select the music for lunch. Women like to feel involved in creating the atmosphere. Ask her about her family, her interests, her opinions on the art you've collected." Margaret stared at Sophia as if she'd grown a second head. This was not how the world was supposed to work. People like Sophia were supposed to apologize, to grovel, to accept blame for things that weren't their fault. "Who do you think you are?" Margaret whispered, her voice shaking with rage and something else, something that might have been fear. Sophia smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. It was the smile of someone who had just realized they held all the cards. "I'm the daughter of the woman who has been keeping your life organized for 2 years, Sophia said quietly. "I'm the person who has watched you treat my mother like she's invisible, while she makes sure every corner of your world is perfect. And right now, I'm the only person in this room who knows how to save your husband's business deal." The knocking at the door became more insistent. Elena Vasquez's voice carried a note of concern now. "Mrs. Whitmore, is everything all right?" Sophia walked to the intercom system, something she had observed Margaret use several times during their hours in the kitchen. She pressed the button with the confidence of someone who belonged there. "Mrs. Vasquez, this is Sophia. Mrs. Whitmore will be right with you. She's just putting the finishing touches on a surprise she's prepared for your visit." Eleanor's voice brightened immediately. "Oh, how wonderful. Take your time." Sophia released the intercom button and turned back to Margaret, who was staring at her with a mixture of shock and grudging admiration. "You have exactly 2 minutes to decide what kind of person you want to be," Sophia said. "You can continue this tantrum, send us away, and explain to your husband why his $50 million deal fell apart because you couldn't handle a minor spill. Or you can acknowledge that my mother is a professional who has never once let you down, apologize for your behavior, and let us help you turn this disaster into the successful luncheon you planned." Carmen finally found her voice. "Sophia, mija, stop. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly, Mama," Sophia interrupted, switching to Spanish. "Entiendo que esta mujer has been treating you like dirt for 2 years while you make her life possible. Entiendo que she thinks her money makes her better than us. And I understand que right now we have something she needs más than she has ever needed anything in her privileged life." She turned back to Margaret, switching back to English. "Your choice, Mrs. Whitmore, but choose quickly. Mrs. Vasquez is probably wondering why the wealthy, sophisticated hostess she expected to meet is keeping her waiting in a hallway." Margaret's mind raced. Everything Sophia had said was true, painfully, embarrassingly true. She was terrified of Elena Vasquez's judgment, terrified of failing Charles, terrified of being exposed as someone who had style but no substance. And somehow this teenager had seen, through her completely in the space of a few sentences, the practical part of Margaret's brain, the part that had helped her navigate New York. Society for 15 years began to take over. The deal was worth $50 million. Charles had made it clear that failure was not an option. And despite her fury, she had to admit that Sophia had cleaned up the wine faster and more efficiently than Margaret ever could have. "What do you want?" Margaret asked through gritted teeth. Sophia's expression didn't change. "I want you to treat my mother with the respect she deserves. Not just today, but always. She's not your servant. She's a professional providing a service. I want you to remember that we're human beings, not furniture that happens to clean your house." Margaret's jaw tightened. "And if I refuse?" Sophia shrugged. "Then we leave. Right now. You can explain to Mrs. Vasquez why your home isn't ready for her visit, why there's no one to serve lunch, and why the floral arrangements are wilting. You can tell your husband that his $50 million deal fell apart because you prioritized your ego over his business." The silence in the kitchen was deafening. Carmen watched her daughter face down one of the most powerful women in Manhattan with the calm confidence of someone who had nothing left to lose. Sophia had calculated the odds and realized something that Margaret was only beginning to understand in this moment. The 17-year-old held all the power. Margaret looked at the wine-stained marble, then at her own reflection in the black screen of her phone. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged, her designer dress stained with wine. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had lost control of a situation that should have been simple. "Fine," she whispered, the word tasting like poison in her mouth. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore," Sophia said politely. "I didn't hear you clearly." Margaret's hands clenched into fists at her sides. This child was making her spell out her humiliation, word by word. "Fine," she repeated louder this time. I accept your terms." Sophia nodded as if she had expected nothing less. "Excellent. Now here's what we're going to do." Sophia moved with the precision of a military strategist executing a battle plan. She opened the wine refrigerator and retrieved the Chateau Margaux, setting it on the counter with practiced ease. "Mrs. Rodriguez," she said formally, addressing her mother as if they were colleagues rather than family. "Please prepare the silver serving tray with the artisanal crackers and the imported cheese selection. Mrs. Whitmore will want to offer something elegant while the wine breathes." Carmen, still processing what had just happened, nodded and moved toward the pantry. She had never seen this side of her daughter, this commanding presence that seemed to fill the entire kitchen. Sophia turned her attention back to Margaret, who stood frozen in the aftermath of her capitulation. "You need to change your dress. The wine stains will be the first thing Mrs. Vasquez notices, and it will signal chaos rather than sophistication." Margaret looked down at her ruined outfit, a $3,000 Carolina Herrera dress that was now unwearable. "I can't just—" "You have a navy Armani cocktail dress in your closet," Sophia interrupted. "Third section from the left, hanging between the black Chanel and the burgundy Valentino. It will complement the color scheme you've chosen for today's table settings, and navy projects confidence and authority." Margaret stared at Sophia in bewilderment. "How could you possibly know I've been in your home for 3 hours?" Sophia replied calmly. "I observe things. I notice details. It's a skill you develop when people treat you like you're invisible." The barb hit its mark, and Margaret flinched. But there was no time for wounded pride. Elena Vasquez's voice could be heard through the door again, this time accompanied by a man's voice that could only belong to Ricardo Vasquez himself. "Go change," Sophia commanded. "I'll handle everything else." Margaret hesitated for a moment, caught between her ingrained need to maintain control and the growing realization that Sophia was demonstrating more competence in crisis management than Margaret had ever possessed. The sound of voices in the hallway made the decision for her. She hurried toward her bedroom, her designer heels clicking frantically against the marble. As soon as Margaret disappeared, Sophia's entire demeanor shifted. The commanding presence remained, but now it was focused on practical action rather than psychological warfare. She moved to the intercom system again. "Mr. and Mrs. Vasquez, this is Sophia again. Mrs. Whitmore is just making a quick wardrobe adjustment. She spilled a tiny bit of wine on her dress while preparing your surprise. She'll be with you in just 2 minutes, and she's asked me to let you know that she's incredibly excited to meet you both." Ricardo's voice came through the speaker, warm and amused. "A woman after my own heart. I've ruined more shirts with wine than I care to admit. Please tell her we're in no hurry." Sophia smiled, a genuine expression this time, unlike the calculated ones she had directed at Margaret. "I certainly will, sir. Thank you for your patience." She turned to her mother, who was arranging cheese and crackers with the skill that came from years of high-end catering preparation. "Mama, are you okay?" Carmen looked up, her eyes filled with a mixture of pride, terror, and amazement. "Mija, what have you done? This woman could destroy us. She could make sure I never work in this neighborhood again." No, she can't, Sophia replied with certainty. Not anymore. She needs us too much and she knows it. But more importantly, she's about to learn something about herself that she's been avoiding for years. Sophia began opening the wine with movements that were both confident and careful. Mrs. Whitmore isn't evil, Mama. She's just empty. She's built her entire identity around having expensive things and controlling her environment because she doesn't know who she is without those things. Carmen watched her daughter work, seeing glimpses of the woman Sophia would become, someone who could read people and situations with startling accuracy, someone who understood that true power came from knowledge and timing rather than money and volume. When I was sitting at that kitchen island, doing my homework, I was also watching, Sophia continued. I saw how she checked her phone every 30 seconds, not for messages, but to avoid looking at herself in the reflection of the window. I saw how she kept rearranging things that were already perfect because she needed to feel useful. I saw how terrified she was of Mrs. Vasquez's judgment. Margaret reappeared in the doorway, transformed. The navy dress Sophia had recommended was perfect, sophisticated without being ostentatious, elegant without trying too hard. She had fixed her makeup and tamed her hair, and for the first time all day, she looked like the society hostess she was supposed to be. But her eyes were different now. The manic fury had been replaced by something harder to define, a mixture of resentment, grudging respect, and genuine curiosity about this teenager who had somehow taken control of her life. Better? Margaret asked, and Sophia was struck by the fact that she was actually asking for approval rather than demanding it. Much better, Sophia replied honestly. You look like yourself again, instead of someone who's afraid of her own shadow. Margaret's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but not the grimace Sophia had expected either. You have a very unusual way of giving compliments. I don't give compliments, Sophia corrected. I state facts. Right now, the fact is that you look like a woman who belongs in a penthouse on Central Park West. 5 minutes ago, you looked like someone who had broken into that woman's closet. Carmen finished with the appetizer tray and stepped back to admire her work. The presentation was flawless, artistic without being pretentious, abundant without being wasteful. It was exactly the kind of detail that separated professional service from amateur effort. Sophia noticed her mother's work and nodded approvingly. Perfect, Mrs. Rodriguez. Mrs. Whitmore, your guests are probably expecting their surprise by now. Margaret looked confused. What surprise? I never mentioned the surprise that bought us time while you pulled yourself together, Sophia explained patiently. Mrs. Vasquez is expecting something special. I suggest you tell her that you've prepared a small wine tasting featuring selections from the same region where her husband's company is planning to expand their operations. Margaret's eyes widened. How did you know about the expansion plans? Sophia smiled mysteriously. The business section of the Times has been sitting on your coffee table for 3 days, folded open to the article about Vasquez Industries' Latin American growth strategy. Most people don't read newspapers anymore, but successful people still prefer print for important news. You left it visible because you wanted to remind yourself of the stakes involved in today's meeting. The level of observation and deduction left Margaret speechless. This 17-year-old had spent a few hours in her home and understood her psychology better than people who had known her for years. There's something else, Sophia added, her tone becoming more serious. When you greet Mrs. Vasquez, ask her about her daughter Isabella. She's studying international business at Georgetown, and Mrs. Vasquez is incredibly proud of her academic achievements. It will establish common ground and show that you're interested in her as a person, not just as a business contact. Margaret frowned. How could you possibly know about her daughter? Sophia gestured toward the kitchen island where she had been doing homework. Your tablet was open to Mrs. Vasquez's LinkedIn profile. You'd been researching her background, but you were focusing on the wrong information. You memorized her professional accomplishments, but you ignored the personal details that would actually matter in a social setting. The doorbell rang again, a polite, patient ring that somehow conveyed both courtesy and expectation. "It's time," Sophia announced. She straightened her shoulders and looked directly at Margaret. "Remember, you're not trying to impress them with your wealth. They already know you have money. You're trying to show them that you're the kind of person they want to do business with. That means being gracious, interested in their lives, and confident without being arrogant." Margaret nodded, absorbing the advice despite herself. "And what about the situation? What if they ask questions about you being here?" Sophia's smile was enigmatic. "If they ask, tell them the truth, that I'm Mrs. Rodriguez's daughter and that I'm incredibly proud of the work she does. Tell them that you believe in supporting families and that you're honored to have such dedicated professionals working with your household." The subtext was clear. Sophia was giving Margaret a script that would make her look magnanimous while ensuring that any future mistreatment would be impossible to hide. "One more thing," Sophia added, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more authority than all her previous commands. "Mrs. Vasquez will be watching how you treat my mother throughout this lunch. Wealthy women pay attention to those details because they understand that character is revealed in how someone treats people who can't fight back. If you want this deal to succeed, you'll remember that." Margaret absorbed this final piece of strategy, recognizing its wisdom even as she resented its source. She had been outmaneuvered, educated, and essentially coached by a teenager who should have been powerless in this situation. But as she walked toward the front door, Margaret realized something unexpected for the first time all morning. She wasn't afraid of the people waiting outside. Sophia's confidence had somehow transferred to her, and she actually felt ready to be the hostess she had always claimed to be. The door handle felt steady in her, and as she prepared to greet the most important guests of her husband's career, Margaret opened the door with a smile that, for the first time in hours, didn't feel forced. Standing before her were Ricardo and Elena Vasquez, a couple whose presence immediately filled the hallway with warmth and understated elegance. Ricardo Vasquez was shorter than Margaret had expected, perhaps 5'8", with silver-streaked hair and laugh lines that suggested a man who enjoyed life despite the pressures of running a billion-dollar empire. Elena was stunning in an effortless way, wearing a simple cream-colored dress that probably cost less than Margaret's shoes, but looked infinitely more sophisticated. "Mrs. Vasquez, Mr. Vasquez, I'm Margaret Whitmore," she said, extending her hand with genuine warmth. "I'm so delighted you could join me today, and I apologize for keeping you waiting. I was putting the finishing touches on a small surprise I've prepared." Elena's handshake was firm and confident. "Please call me Elena. And this must be the surprise Sophia mentioned. You look absolutely radiant. That color is perfect on you." Margaret felt a flush of genuine pleasure at the compliment. "Thank you so much. Please come in. I'm eager to show you our home and learn more about your family." As they entered the penthouse, Ricardo let out a low whistle of appreciation. "This is spectacular, Margaret. The light in here is incredible. It must be even more beautiful in the morning." "It is," Margaret agreed, leading them toward the living room. "We chose this apartment specifically for the eastern exposure. Charles works such long hours that I wanted him to wake up to something beautiful every day." Elena smiled at this insight into Margaret's marriage. "That's wonderfully thoughtful. How long have you been married?" 12 years next month," Margaret replied, and for the first time she mentioned her anniversary without calculating its value in terms of social status or financial security. "We met at a charity auction. He outbid me for a painting I desperately wanted, then had the audacity to ask me to dinner to see it." Ricardo laughed, a rich sound that filled the room. "I like this man already. Elena, didn't I do something similar when we met?" "You bought the entire restaurant," Elena said, rolling her eyes with affectionate exasperation. "Because you were too nervous to ask me out directly." The easy banter between the couple created an atmosphere of relaxed intimacy that Margaret found herself unexpectedly drawn into. This wasn't the formal business negotiation she had been dreading. It was simply three people getting to know each other. Sophia appeared in the doorway, carrying the wine and appetizer tray, moving with professional discretion that somehow managed to be both present and invisible. She set the tray on the coffee table with practiced grace. "I've prepared a small wine tasting, featuring selections from regions where your company is expanding," Margaret announced, following Sophia's script but adding her own enthusiasm. "I thought it might be interesting to explore the terroir alongside your business ventures." Elena's eyes lit up with genuine interest. "What a fascinating idea. Ricardo, she's done her homework." Sophia poured the wine with expert precision, and Margaret noticed how naturally she seemed to anticipate each guest's needs, refilling Elena's water glass without being asked, adjusting the angle of Ricardo's chair slightly so he could see the artwork better. "This is Sofia Rodriguez," Margaret said, and the words came out more easily than she had expected. "She's the daughter of Carmen Rodriguez, who helps maintain our home. Sofia is one of the most insightful young people I've ever met." Sophia nodded politely, but didn't interrupt the flow of conversation. Margaret realized that Sophia's presence actually enhanced the gathering rather than detracting from it. Her quiet competence created an atmosphere of seamless hospitality that allowed the adults to focus entirely on each other. "Speaking of insightful young people," Margaret continued, remembering Sophia's coaching, "I understand your daughter Isabella is studying international business at Georgetown. You must be incredibly proud of her achievements." Elena's face transformed with maternal pride. "Oh, Isabella is remarkable. She's actually writing her senior thesis on sustainable business practices in emerging markets, something that's become very important to Ricardo's company philosophy." Ricardo nodded enthusiastically. "She's teaching us as much as we're teaching her. Last month, she presented a proposal for our Brazilian operations that would reduce our environmental impact by 30% while actually increasing efficiency." "That's extraordinary," Margaret said, and her interest was completely genuine. "It sounds like she's inherited your business acumen along with your social consciousness." As the conversation flowed, Margaret found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't experienced in years. Elena was genuinely interesting, a former environmental lawyer who had met Ricardo while representing an indigenous community affected by mining operations. Their business partnership had evolved into a romance that resulted in both marriage and a corporate philosophy centered on sustainable development. "We believe that business success and social responsibility aren't just compatible, they're inseparable," Elena explained as Sophia refilled their wine glasses. "Companies that ignore their environmental and social impact are ultimately less sustainable than those that embrace it." Margaret nodded thoughtfully. "That's a philosophy Charles has been moving toward as well. He's been saying that the future belongs to companies that can prove their value extends beyond profit margins." Ricardo leaned forward with interest. "Exactly. Shareholders are becoming more sophisticated about long-term value. They're starting to understand that companies with strong ethical foundations are simply better investments." Sophia moved quietly around the room, adjusting flowers and ensuring that each guest's needs were met without interrupting the conversation. Margaret watched her work and began to understand something she had never considered before. True hospitality wasn't about demonstrating wealth or control. It was about creating an environment where people could connect authentically. "Sophia," Eleanor said suddenly, causing the teenager to pause in her discreet arrangements. "I hope you don't mind me saying, but your service today has been exceptional. Have you considered hospitality management as a career path?" Sophia smiled politely. "Thank you, Mrs. Vasquez. Actually, I'm planning to study business and economics. I'm particularly interested in how economic policies affect working families." Elena's eyebrows rose with interest. "That's fascinating. What aspects specifically?" Margaret watched as Sophia engaged with Elena's question, her intelligence becoming immediately apparent as she discussed income inequality, educational access, and economic mobility with the sophistication of someone twice her age. She's already been accepted to Columbia on a full academic scholarship, Carmen said quietly, appearing from the kitchen where she had been preparing lunch. Margaret noticed that Carmen's voice carried a note of pride that transcended the professional deference she usually maintained. Ricardo sat back in his chair, clearly impressed. Columbia Business School? Actually, I'll be starting with their undergraduate economics program, Sophia clarified. I want to build a strong foundation in economic theory before specializing in policy development. Elena exchanged a meaningful glance with her husband. Sophia, would you be interested in discussing an internship opportunity with our company? We have a community development division that works on exactly the kind of issues you're passionate about. Margaret felt a jolt of surprise. This wasn't part of Sophia's script. This was a genuine opportunity arising from authentic connection. Sophia's composure finally cracked slightly, revealing the 17-year-old beneath the professional exterior. That would be incredible. Thank you for considering me. Consider yourself more than considered, Ricardo said with a grin. Elena's instincts about people are impeccable. If she sees potential in you, it's because it's there. Carmen's eyes filled with tears she was fighting to contain. Margaret realized she was witnessing a moment that would change Sophia's life trajectory, and it was happening in her living room. Facilitated by her introduction, Carmen, Elena said, turning to address Sophia's mother directly, you should be incredibly proud. It's clear that Sophia's intelligence and work ethic come from the example you've set. Margaret watched Carmen accept the compliment with grace and dignity, and suddenly understood what Sophia had been trying to tell her earlier. These weren't people to be managed or impressed. They were people to be respected and appreciated. Mrs. Rodriguez has been an absolute treasure, Margaret found herself saying, and the words were completely sincere. Her attention to detail and professional integrity have made our home a more beautiful and peaceful place. Sophia caught Margaret's eye and nodded almost imperceptibly, a gesture of acknowledgement that felt like approval as they moved toward the dining room for lunch. Margaret realized that the morning's crisis had transformed into something unexpected. What should have been a stressful performance had become a genuine social connection. The Vasquez family wasn't judging her worthiness. They were enjoying her company, but as they settled around the elegantly appointed dining table, Margaret noticed Ricardo checking his phone with a slight frown. A text message had appeared that made his expression shift from relaxed enjoyment to focused concern. Elena, he said quietly, I just received some information about the Whitmore Industries contract. We'd need to discuss this. Margaret's stomach dropped as she watched Ricardo's expression grow increasingly serious while he read his phone. Elena noticed the change immediately, her own face shifting from relaxed enjoyment to concerned attention. What is it, querido? Elena asked softly, using the Spanish endearment that revealed their intimate connection. Ricardo looked up from his phone, his eyes moving between Margaret and Eleanor with the careful consideration of a man choosing his words precisely. I've just received some rather disturbing information from our security team about Charles Whitmore's business practices. The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. Everything that had been going so perfectly was about to crumble, and she had no idea why. I don't understand. Charles has always conducted business with complete integrity. Sophia, who had been quietly serving the first course, paused in her movements. Her expression remained professionally neutral, but Margaret noticed a slight tension in her shoulders. Ricardo set his phone down carefully. According to our due diligence team, there are some concerning reports about how Whitmore Industries treats its subcontractors. Specifically, allegations of delayed payments to small businesses and minority-owned firms. Margaret felt the blood drain from her face. She knew Charles's company sometimes stretched payment terms, but she had never considered the impact on smaller businesses. There must be some mistake. Unfortunately, there's more, Ricardo continued, his tone remaining respectful but firm. We've received reports that your husband's company has a pattern of underpaying cleaning services, maintenance crews, and other support staff. In some cases, workers have filed complaints about wage theft and unsafe working conditions. Elena watched Margaret's reaction carefully. Margaret, we need you to understand, our company's reputation is built on ethical partnerships. We can't enter into a $50 million agreement with an organization that exploits working families. Margaret's mind raced as she processed this information. She thought about her interactions with Carmen over the past 2 years, always professional, always deferential, never a hint of complaint. But now she wondered what had been hidden beneath that professional exterior. Mrs. Whitmore, Sophia said quietly, setting down the serving tray. May I speak? Margaret looked at the teenager who had already turned her world upside down once today. Of course. Sophia turned to address Ricardo and Elena directly. Mr. and Mrs. Vasquez, I appreciate your commitment to ethical business practices. It's exactly the kind of leadership that gives me hope for the future. But I think there might be more to this situation than your reports indicate. Ricardo raised an eyebrow. How so? This morning, Mrs. Whitmore had what I would call a learning experience, Sophia said diplomatically. She discovered that her assumptions about the people who work in her home were incomplete. She's already begun making changes to address those misconceptions. Elena looked intrigued. What kind of changes? Sophia glanced at Margaret, who nodded for her to continue. She's agreed to treat my mother and other household staff as the professionals they are, rather than as invisible servants. She's also committed to ensuring that their work is respected and properly valued. Margaret realized that Sophia was giving her an opportunity to demonstrate growth rather than simply defend past behavior. Sophia is right, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. I've been guilty of taking for granted the people who make my life possible. Today has been educational. Ricardo studied Margaret's face carefully. That's admirable, Margaret. But personal growth doesn't address systemic issues within your husband's company. Actually, Sophia interjected, it might address more than you think. All eyes turned to the teenager, who seemed to be weighing her words carefully. Mrs. Whitmore, do you know why my mother has never complained about working conditions or payment delays? Margaret shook her head, though she was beginning to suspect the answer wouldn't be comfortable. Because she's afraid, Sophia said simply. Afraid that speaking up will cost her this job, which would mean losing our apartment, my school supplies, her English classes. When people are afraid, they accept treatment they shouldn't have to accept. Elena leaned forward with interest. And you think Margaret's attitude change could influence broader company policies? Sophia nodded. Mrs. Whitmore has more influence than she realizes. Her husband values her opinion, especially about social and community matters. If she became an advocate for fair treatment of workers and small businesses, it could create significant change. Margaret felt a strange sensation, something that might have been hope mixed with purpose. You're suggesting I could actually make a difference? I'm suggesting you already are, Sophia replied. The question is whether you want to expand that influence beyond your own home. Ricardo exchanged a meaningful look with his wife. Margaret, what Sophia is describing sounds like exactly the kind of partnership we're looking for. A company that's willing to examine its practices and make meaningful changes. Elena nodded enthusiastically. We're not looking for perfect partners. We're looking for committed partners, companies that are willing to grow and improve. Margaret felt a surge of possibility she hadn't experienced in years. What would that look like practically? It would mean working with Charles to implement new policies, Elena explained. Fair payment terms for all contractors, transparent wage structures, regular audits of working conditions. It would mean making your company a model for ethical business practices. Sophia stepped forward slightly. It would also mean creating pathways for advancement for people like my mother, recognizing that intelligence and competence exist at every level of an organization. Margaret looked at Carmen, who'd been quietly observing from the kitchen doorway. For the first time, she really saw her, not as hired help, but as a woman who had been managing complex households, coordinating multiple responsibilities, and raising an exceptional daughter while navigating a language barrier and economic uncertainty. "Carmen," Margaret said, addressing her directly, "I owe you an apology, a significant one. You've been professional and dedicated for 2 years, and I've been blind to your actual contributions." Carmen stepped forward, her dignity intact despite the morning's chaos. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore, I appreciate that." "More than an apology," Margaret continued, her voice gaining strength. "I want to offer you a position as household manager with a salary that reflects your actual responsibilities and contributions. I also want to discuss how your organizational skills might be valuable to my husband's company." Sophia's eyebrows rose in surprise. This was beyond anything she had expected or demanded. Ricardo smiled for the first time since reading his phone. "Now, that's the kind of leadership that builds successful partnerships." Elena reached across the table to squeeze Margaret's hand. "This is exactly what we hoped to find, someone willing to turn challenges into opportunities." Margaret felt tears threatening, but they weren't tears of frustration or fear. They were tears of relief and excitement about possibilities she had never considered. "Charles is going to be very surprised when I explain what I've learned today." Sophia grinned. "I suspect he'll be impressed. Men who build billion-dollar companies usually appreciate innovative problem-solving." Speaking of innovative problem-solving," Elena said, turning to Sophia, "I meant what I said about that internship. We could use someone with your insights on our community development team." Ricardo nodded. "And if Margaret is serious about creating change within Whitmore Industries, having Sophia's perspective during the transition could be invaluable." Margaret looked around the table at Elena's warm enthusiasm, Ricardo's satisfied approval, Carmen's quiet pride, and Sophia's confident smile. The morning had begun with a crisis that threatened everything Charles had worked for. It was ending, with the foundation for a partnership that could transform everything they had built. "So," Margaret said, raising her wine glass, "are we celebrating a new business partnership or a new approach to business partnerships?" Elena raised her glass in response. "Both. To partnerships built on respect, growth, and the recognition that everyone's contribution matters." As they toasted, Margaret caught Sophia's eye. The teenager who had faced down her fury and turned a disaster into triumph nodded almost imperceptibly, a gesture that acknowledged not just success, but transformation. Later, as the Vasquez family prepared to leave, Ricardo pulled Margaret aside. "You should know that our security team will be conducting follow-up investigations over the next few weeks. But based on what we've seen today, I'm confident that Whitmore Industries is exactly the kind of partner we want for our expansion." Margaret shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for giving us the opportunity to prove that confidence is well placed." As the door closed behind their guests, Margaret turned to find Sophia and Carmen cleaning up with the same professional efficiency they had demonstrated all day. But something fundamental had changed. They were no longer invisible workers in her peripheral vision. They were colleagues in creating something better. "Sophia," Margaret said, "when you start at Columbia, I want you to know that you'll always have a place here, not as help, but as family." Sophia smiled, the expression carrying all the warmth that her earlier strategic calculations had lacked. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitmore. I think this is going to be the beginning of something extraordinary." Charles Whitmore arrived home that evening, expecting to hear about a successful luncheon. Instead, he found his wife excited about revolutionizing their company's entire approach to business ethics. The $50 million deal was just the beginning. They were about to become pioneers in proving that success and social responsibility weren't just compatible, but inseparable. All because a 17-year-old girl had refused to clean up a mess that wasn't hers to fix. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.